He walked through the ashes of a fallen order, not as a warrior, not as a savior, but as a man haunted by silence. His name carried reverence, but his heart carried weight. The kind of weight that bends the soul, that whispers blame into every breath. Obi-Wan was not just a survivor, he was a remnant, a wound that never closed. They showed us a ghost, wrapped in robes, moving through shadows he once lit. They showed us a protector, watching over a child he would never raise. They showed us a man holding back the tide, but never truly stepping into it, because what he lost was not just Anakin, it was the belief that anything could be saved. The Force did not abandon him, but it grew quiet, like it too was grieving. And so he wandered, not to hide, but to escape the sound of his own failure. And when the past returned, when Vader emerged from flame and fury, Obi-Wan did not rise. He recoiled, because beneath the legend, there was only fear. But legends are not meant to linger. They are meant to burn brightly and fade with grace. And this story, the Kenobi story, should have been the final ember, the last flicker of a legacy too sacred to drag forward. His end would not have been a loss. It would have been the point. The exhale after a life spent holding everything in. To see him fight one last time, to see him choose sacrifice over survival, peace over pain, would not have shattered canon. It would have sealed it, with purpose, with elegance, with truth. It would have honored the weight he carried, the bond he broke, the galaxy he tried to mend with hands, too scarred to hold it all. In this video, we explore why Obi-Wan should have died in the Kenobi series, how his death would have brought meaning to his suffering, clarity to the timeline, and peace to a story stretched too thin. We'll trace the echoes of his arc, the purpose of his fall, and the redemption that can only come from letting go. There is something haunting about an unfinished goodbye, something hollow in a farewell that never lands. Obi-Wan's journey was never meant to fade quietly. It was forged in fire. Loss, guilt, sacrifice. And yet, the Kenobi series chose to extend his suffering, rather than let him rest. The series gave us glimpses of a man broken, glimpses of a Jedi torn between exile and purpose. But those glimpses faded before they could bloom, because the show was too afraid to let him go, too afraid to say this was the end. It held on to legacy, but lost the lesson. We watched him run from confrontation, then rise to meet it again. Watched him confront the shadow of Anakin, only to walk away once more. But how many times can a soul break before it shatters? How many times can redemption be delayed before it becomes denial? If the story had dared to end him, it could have said something. Something final, something meaningful. It could have closed the loop instead of stretching it. It could have transformed tragedy into peace instead of recycling pain. There was power waiting in that final breath. There was poetry in sacrifice, in letting go of the past to protect the future. But the show blinked, and that silence, the silence where an ending should have been, still echoes louder than words. There is a weight to beloved characters, a fear that if they fall, the world we knew might fall with them. But legacy is not preserved by survival. It is preserved by meaning. And Obi-Wan's story was trapped by hesitation. The show wanted to honor him, but in trying to protect his image, it diluted his impact. It was not bold, it was careful. And in that caution, it became forgettable. The moments that should have defined him were scattered, restrained, safe. We watched the Clone Wars tear him apart, watched Order 66 steal his family, watched Mustafar steal his brother, and then we watched him hide, survive, endure. But endurance without transformation is not growth, it is limbo. By letting him live through the series without resolution, they extended his suffering without conclusion. It was not mercy. It was prolonging a fate already sealed. They kept him alive not because the story needed him, but because the franchise was afraid to lose him. But sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. Sometimes, honoring a character means letting them find peace, not keeping them on life support, not freezing them in endless repetition, but setting them free through finality, through truth. Obi-Wan was not just a Jedi, he was the embodiment of duty, a man who gave everything and lost more. He was never allowed to grieve, never allowed to rest, never allowed to be anything but a symbol. Even when he was falling apart, he trained the Chosen One, then watched him fall. He stood by a republic that crumbled into empire. He held a blade over his brother and walked away from the ashes, and yet he kept going, not because he believed, but because there was no one else left. In the Kenobi series, we saw a flicker of that devastation, saw him afraid, lost, disconnected. But instead of bringing that arc to a crescendo, instead of letting him find closure through sacrifice, they stalled him, kept him circling the same grief. He should have died saving something real, saving Luke, or Leia, or even the Force itself, not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet act of defiance, of peace. A final stand that said, "I've carried this long enough. Now I let go." That death would not have been defeat. It would have been liberation. It would have shown that even the strongest shoulders break, that even heroes need rest, that even legends must end. And in ending, they become eternal. There is a fracture in the timeline now, a ripple that distorts the shape of everything that came after. The Kenobi series tried to dance between what was and what must be, but the dance left footprints too deep, too sharp. Vader and Kenobi were meant to meet once, then again on the Death Star, their reunion laced with finality, with mystery, with tension born of decades, not days. But the series unraveled that thread, pulled it too early, and left the tapestry frayed. Their duel was beautiful, but unnecessary. Their dialogue was moving, but misplaced. The more they interacted, the less weight their future encounter carried, and the tragedy of their separation dimmed under the weight of convenience. And so continuity became casualty, not just in events, but in emotion, in pacing, in myth. The story bent the rules to include moments it had no room for, moments that reshaped the foundation instead of enhancing it. If Obi-Wan had died, the pieces might have aligned again. His sacrifice could have sealed the cracks, justified the silence that followed, preserved the weight of Vader's later words, and restored balance to a timeline now struggling to remember itself. There is a rare beauty in endings, a quiet power that only final moments can offer. Obi-Wan deserved that moment, not as punishment, but as grace, as closure, as reward. Imagine a final act of clarity, where he gives his life not because he must, but because he chooses to, not out of defeat, but out of understanding that the future needs space to grow, and his shadow no longer belongs in it. His death could have passed the torch in silence, with dignity, not through speeches, but through presence. A choice that says, "I have done enough. I have said enough. Now, I rest." That would not have erased his legacy. It would have engraved it deeper. Luke would not remember him as a hermit, but as a guardian who gave everything. Leia would not only remember his rescue, but his sacrifice, and the audience would remember the weight of that moment forever. Not because it shocked them, but because it completed something. Obi-Wan Kenobi did not need more stories. He needed one final story, one that ended with peace, not pain, with silence, not repetition, with a final breath that echoed louder than 1,000 words ever could. Some characters outgrow the screen. They live in memory, in echoes, in the space between words. Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of them, and his story deserved a conclusion that matched the gravity of his journey. By letting him live without purpose, the series left him suspended, a ghost not yet gone, a warrior without a war. It feared his death would be too heavy, but instead, it made his presence weightless. A proper ending would not have erased him. It would have immortalized him, not as a Jedi who lingered, but as one who chose peace, who chose finality, who chose to become part of the Force by his own hand. His sacrifice could have bridged the old and the new, closed the chapter of the Jedi's fall and whispered the beginning of their rebirth. It could have aligned emotion with mythology, story with soul. Obi-Wan should have died in the Kenobi series, not for shock, not for spectacle, but because endings matter, because stories need closure, because the Force demands balance, and balance always begins with letting go.